Hey everybody, it's Ruby here today, and today I wanted to do a book review comparing Brave New World in 1984. These books are often paired together, and I thought I would do my own take on the similarities and differences between them, as well as which one I liked more. So a lot of you had recommended that I read 1984 because you thought it would be right up my alley in terms of science fiction, dystopian, philosophical fiction, and as well the fact that I had already liked Brave New World. So I read it in December and I was going to do a book review then, but I discovered that I was actually going to be reading Brave New World again in my science fiction class, so I figured that I'd do a comparison piece instead. Just to let you know, there might be some spoilers in this, which I think for these books is actually necessary. I don't think spoiler warnings are always necessary in books. I think a lot of the time, if a spoiler warning is needed, then the book wasn't written very well. But for these kinds of books where the actions of the characters matter quite a bit, I think that it is necessary to point out. So I'll do a summary first and then I'll compare them. So the first one is Brave New World. It was published in 1932 by Aldous Huxley, so between World War I and World War II. In this world, it's been about 400 years since society has been as we think of it. Now it has been more socially conditioned. People aren't allowed to really be alone by themselves. Nobody contemplates art anymore. Nobody reads. And family has been abolished. Instead, people grow in test tubes where they create a social hierarchy. So the alpha plus are people who are all individuals. They have prime conditions to grow up in, while the very bottom, the epsilons, I believe, are developmentally disabled by having alcohol put in their test tubes, and they have been cloned. So, well, not cloned, but they're all twins. So there's thousands of these twins that look very similar that are used for basically manual labor. And the idea is that if you are conditioned in that particular circumstance, you're okay with the conditions that you're in. Everybody's also given the drug Soma so that if you're having a bad day or if you'd like to go on a drug trip, you can take it and there's no side effects. And generally, the whole concept is being as happy as possible. Because family has been abolished, there's no partners, it's more polyamorous, you can sleep with whomever you want, and everybody belongs to everybody else. The plot of the book is, through a couple of different characters' eyes, you have Lenina, who is just a regular 20-something woman who goes on a date with Bernard Marx. He is a propagandist, so he writes a lot of the books or textbooks or social conditioning that are given to the children, and he takes her to a reservation in North America, where the society that is in Brave New World isn't necessarily the case on this reservation. While they're there, they encounter John Savage, who is a child that grew up on the reservation but isn't Aboriginal in any way. His mother was part of this other society, but it had been left by someone else while she was pregnant, because you don't get pregnant in that society, and she had to live in this whole new world old world that is a lot dirtier, that actually has families, and has religion, which is abolished in this other world. So you get a lot of contrasts. So they bring them back to England, which is where like the Brave New World is, where the socially conditioned world is. And while they're there, John Savage encounters culture shock, where his values clash a lot with the society that he is discovering. There's no religion, there's no individual thought, no isolation, nothing that he was brought up with, and nothing that he values in any sort of way. So the utopia that is created is put into question, basically. On the other hand, you have 1984, written by George Orwell, published in 1949, so a couple of years after World War II. This is a dystopian novel that involves a lot of the same elements as Brave New World. There's social conditioning and propaganda, but the world is led by fear and totalitarian governments. You're not really allowed to think individually, and if you do, you're captured by the thought police. A lot of people work within the circle of the government, the outer party, to create this socialist, communist, but very dystopian world. There's Big Brother, which watches over everybody, and there are daily rituals of sort of anger and disdain for the enemy. They're also constantly at war. The world has been broken up to 3 different continents, and as far as the narrator can tell, it's been, I think, 30 or 40 years since the last major war, which resulted in these conditions. Aldous Huxley actually suggested that this could have been the beginning of his world. So because Brave New World starts like 400 years into the future, it could be that the world started out with a totalitarian government that rules on fear in 1984 that results in Brave New World. The main character, Winston Smith, is a propagandist who has to rewrite history over and over and over again as the wars change. So what they'll discover is that there is no absolute truth when it comes to history, and that every time they win a war against a continent, history will be rewritten to say that they've always been at war. Because of that and a couple of other things that he discovers, he realizes that he really wants to rebel against this government and tries to join a rebellion. Along the way, he encounters his friend Julia, who he becomes the lover of. And that's an interesting component because they end up going out into the countryside and having sex, which is their own way of rebelling. So basically, sex has become only for biological purposes. As you can tell, there's a lot of similarities in the books. There's basically no individualization or choice in the characters' abilities to choose in the world. The government has completely taken over and they've socially conditioned everybody to be okay with what's going on. Another thing that I considered that I didn't notice anybody really talk about is that both main characters are propagandists, so they're basically writers in the world. And I've noticed in books that a lot of writers will write about writers, which is really interesting, but in this particular case, writing has taken a whole other viewpoint, basically. I think Neil Postman had also talked about how a lot of the discrepancies between them is that 1984 rules in fear and in totalitarian governments that we would have actually seen in like the Cold War era in World War II with Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and like the Cultural Revolution. But in Brave New World, Aldous Huxley basically created a society in which he was scared that we'd be so pacified by happiness, we would never pursue any sort of science or art. So there's 2 fundamentally like different philosophies that come into play with these books. I think a lot of people really like 1984. When I asked online, like on Facebook with my friends, they said that it's because they consider it to be a lot more prevalent and a lot more applicable to their world. So 1984's terminology has also spanned a lot more. I think a lot of people would know the term Big Brother or Orwellian or like the paradoxical statement they have to say, war is peace and things like that. So there's definitely a general consensus that seems to like 1984 a lot better. The interesting thing, and one of the reasons I wanted to actually create this video, is that I think that it's kind of the opposite. I liked Brave New World a lot better than 1984, and I think it's also a lot more applicable in our society. I found on a superficial level that Brave New World was a lot more aesthetically pleasing. It was written a lot better, it introduced the characters a lot better, and he created these stylistic elements that were incredible, where people would fight with each other and you wouldn't really know where the dialogue was coming from. And at the very end, when there was this philosophical debate between John Savage and a director, it was literally a philosophical debate about the difference between whether or not religion is essential to humanity or a function of humanity. So I was able to actually pick out a lot of the academics that Huxley was leaning on when he was writing the book. 1984 does that a little bit. There's a manifesto in it, and there are a couple of debates at the very end that talk about social conditioning and of winning people over in a certain sort of dictatorship. But I found it a lot denser. I got lost a lot more easily, and the narration itself didn't draw me in the same sort of way. I also found that the ending of 1984 to be incredibly unfulfilling. I didn't really understand why he was being tortured, and I didn't really understand why in any way they would have let him back into the population if they had basically destroyed his will to live. Brave New World did something similarly, where John Savage basically commits suicide when he discovers that he's at odds with his society and that he's become like a spectacle of the society. But I think it portrayed the helplessness of the society more than 1984. But I also think that Brave New World is more applicable to our society because of the elements that he put into it. So it's almost 100 years old. So obviously beyond some great predictions, like I think it happens to be really applicable. But the use of psychological classical conditioning to teach children at a young age to do certain things as they grow up, I think is something that psychologists are definitely interested in, not to apply, but just how to do it. We rely on psychology quite a bit to raise children and to take drugs to make us happier, and we still rely on behaviorism in therapy. The satirical elements of how families like destroyed in Brave New World, of how parents like mother and father, like those words are considered bad words, and how everybody's kind of raised by the state, I think in the book was meant to seem really bad, but I found it kind of funny because it's sort of what we're doing, where women are able to have access to birth control and can have children whenever they wish. And there's been a rise of people who would like to be child-free. So, and a rise of liberalism and of common law. And as someone who's pretty liberal, I don't disagree with those statements, but I just found it kind of interesting that he would have included that in his book. And then also just test tube babies. The fact that we can do in vitro fertilization and a whole bunch of different ways that can help parents who might need an extra helping hand to have children is nowhere near the kind of test tube production that was in this book, but it's definitely like a scientific way of sort of intervening with family planning. So anyways, like let me know what you guys think, if you agree with me on any of the points that I made on either of the books, or if there's anything that I missed that you thought were important. And you know, just which one did you like better? Do you understand why I would like Brave New World better, or do you just think that 1984 is a more superior book? Do you agree with me? What are your thoughts? So thanks for listening. Like always, subscribe if you like this video, like, comment, and do your thing. I'll talk to you guys later.